Oops. Here's to new beginnings, eh? Let's see if that works. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Markowsky. Welcome to my studio, my brand new studio. This is the first episode in this new place after nearly 500 in my old studio, and I'm super excited and expecting all sorts of technical issues today. Already been delayed for an hour because of that, but I'm hoping things are working okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for tuning in, and let's get started. I feel like everything's different. I usually have my lavalier microphone. That just wasn't working. Everything was plugged into the right spots, just like it was when I took it apart and moved, but you put it back together, it doesn't work again. Anyway, so let's jump to this here. Oh, no, I forgot my whole routine here. Let's do this properly. Okay. So what we're going to do today is attempt to recreate this painting by Emily Carr, French, or what is it called? Yeah, French landscape from 1911. This is currently on view on the top floor of the Vancouver Art Gallery, not too far away from where I am right now. And so if you make this painting and you happen to be in Vancouver, you could always take the painting right to the museum and compare them side by side and see how they turned out. So we are going to recreate this painting, and I'll just show you kind of some of the steps that we're going to follow to get from here to there. So we're going to start out by talking about how difficult this painting might be for a beginner or intermediate or advanced artist, and whether that's something you want to attempt. Then we're going to talk briefly about materials required. We're going to do an image transfer. I'll show you how to do that. And I can't find my carbon paper, so we're going to do it the old-fashioned way with a pencil. We're going to probably not talk much about Emily Carr's biography, because this is, I think, the 6th episode I've done featuring this incredible master. So since I'm starting an hour late, I'm probably just going to breeze right through. You can obviously watch those previous episodes to learn a little bit more about her life that I've done. Let's see. We'll do a little bit of underpainting, because Emily certainly did herself. And then we're going to bounce around back and forth between the background and foreground. And I'm anticipating wrapping up here in about 3 hours, which is always a terrible thing for me to make any sort of prediction, because I usually overshoot it by double. But that's my plan. So let's... oh, I do want to give a couple little shout outs to a few ways to support the channel. Before I begin here, if you're new and you want to see more of this happening, consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell so that you know when future episodes are taking place. At this point, I'm trying to do Monday afternoons here on the west coast of North America. That might be morning or middle of the night, depending where you are on our beautiful planet. If you want to support the channel with a small donation, you can consider leaving a donation via PayPal. You can scan that link that's on the screen there right now. My preview screen's way up there instead of down there for the time being. And that's going to take you to this page where you can safely donate to support the channel. And thank you to all of those of you who've done that over the years. And I do also want to make a little shout out. You can also use, send an e-transfer via email. You can send money via the super chat or check in the mail. My email's on my website. That's masterstudy.ca. And then from there you can see Yeah. So, also just wanted to take a shout out to the Facebook group. If you haven't joined the Facebook group, it's totally free. It's a great community of artists, maybe just like yourself at various different points of your creative journey. And by scanning that code, you'll go right to the group, and just like that, it'll show you. There's usually maybe about a 300-word biography about every artist that I write up. Spend way too long writing those before every episode, and so you can learn a little bit about who we're going to be exploring and studying from each episode, as well as you can upload a photograph of the painting you made today or maybe 5 years ago to the group, and we'll celebrate your work and give you some free advice on how to improve it. But usually it's just celebration because everyone's doing such a great job, and I want to support everyone's journey to become a better artist and express themselves in the most positive way possible. Wow, look at all the comments in the chat there. There's Kathy. Yeah, I was waiting for you, Kathy, before we got started, so I'm glad that you got home just in time. There's Freedom says, thank you for your course and all your efforts. Thank you. Nikki says, hey teacher, I'm so glad to have you back. Me too. Feels like I'm totally out of sorts, and it's going to take me a little bit of time to get back to a nice oiled machine like I had before. And Lisa says, looking forward to seeing the new studio. Right now, it's very plain right now. I haven't had a time to decorate it. Just been getting things in place. So hopefully over the next few weeks, you'll see it kind of develop a little bit more. I have a beautiful patio back here. So in the summer, we'll open up the windows and get some fresh air. And there's a little bird feeder and everything out there. Misha's congratulations on the new studio. Thank you, Misha. Freedom says, what tools are we going to be using? I'll cover that in a moment here. Kathy says, so happy to be back watching and learning. Thank you. And Dodo says, hi, I know you from the basic drawing course. I like your style a lot. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for chiming in and saying hello. So let's get down to business here. Enough of this silly biz. Let's talk about how difficult today's painting might be. Now, here's the scale going from complete beginner, never touched a paintbrush in your life, to an expert, like one of the masters that we're going to be studying today, for instance, Emily Carr. So where would this painting rank within that? Well, I would say today's painting would be probably a novice level painting. I think this would be a little bit tough if you've never done a painting before, but I think if you've done the basic few episodes to get in this Master Study series, you've learned a little bit about how to mix the color wheel, this should be something that is relatively within your grasp. So I would encourage anyone who's really kind of towards the beginning of their art journey should be able to do this. But of course, if you're an intermediate, advanced, or a master just like Emily, you should be able to do this painting and also be invited to kind of play around with color or be a little bit more expressive and perhaps add things. Maybe they're in this landscape you want to put in, I don't know, Godzilla towering over these trees. Okay, so let's talk about the materials that might be required to do this episode, or to do really most of these paintings that we've done over the course of the last few years. You can scan this QR code. It'll take you right to the Dropbox, so you can download a PDF that has basically a free supply guide you can print out, take to an art supply store, or order online. And it has a list of pretty much everything we're going to be going through here, but just maybe a little bit more detail with some explanations, etc. Anyway, here's your basic set of materials. We're going to be using acrylic paint, a canvas, and some brushes. These are, I don't think we're going to be using any of these things today. I also always suggest to have a cloth or rags, and I just realized I haven't unpacked any of those. So we're going to hope nothing bad happens today. But I do need a rag for cleaning my brushes. Well, we will come to that shortly, shall we? Okay, well, I'll think about that. I should have gone through this list before we began. Okay, so the main thing here is thinking about just the paint that we're going to be using. We're going to be using, well, 7 tubes of acrylic paint, 2 whites, 2 blues, and 2 reds. I do have a black tube of paint, but I rarely use it because I can mix my own black paint, and that's what I'll do today. And I don't think there's any black actually in this painting at all either, so that's fine. Now, the reason why I like using what we call the split primary palette is it really emphasizes warm and cool colors. Every color has got a so-called temperature to it. And that means some colors are either a little bit warmer or cooler than others. And this is a concept you'll hear a lot of artists talk about, the importance of color temperature. And that's because warm colors appear to advance towards the viewer, so and cool colors appear to recede. So if you're making a painting and you want it to look like a window into another world, like a landscape like we're going to be painting today, you want to use cool colors as in the background to create that space, and warm colors in contrast in the foreground. And so we'll do that very same thing today. Okay, so this is the brand of paint that we're going to be using here, these Amsterdam paints. And I've got a little hat box for my paints here. And here's a tube of one of these Amsterdam paints. Now, I'm not sponsored or paid, not given any free supplies or anything to use this paint. I just like it because I think it's the least expensive, highest quality paint that you can get. Yes, there's some more expensive paints like Golden, and for a tube that is about 1/3 of the size, you're going to pay twice the price. It's going to be better, but if you're just starting, you probably aren't going to notice much of a difference. Now, I'm going to breeze through this big list of acrylic paint. This is all in that supply guide, so if you already have some paints by any of these companies, you can look at my list and think about all the other paints that you might want to get in order to recreate as closely as possible the results that we have here. And so I've tried to, I haven't used all of these paints, I should say, but I have spent time on all of their websites comparing and contrasting their colors and doing my best guess to match up to what we're using. You'll see most of the time the colors are, the names of them anywhere, are pretty similar to the ones that I'm using. But there are a few brands here that I don't recommend. And these are because, especially Fevicryl and Mary's paint here, these are 2 brands I've never used, but people in our community have used, and just seeing the struggles they had, it doesn't seem like it's worth it. Neither Peebo, which is a massive global brand all over the place. Museum Color is a smaller Canadian brand, but all 4 of them, what they do is they add way too much white, titanium white, as a filler in the paint. And most paint companies do that anyway, especially less expensive paints. But these guys put way too much in there, and it just makes it impossible to make a black like I'm going to do with these Amsterdam paints. And that means you're always going to be painting pastels. Pastels can be really great, but if you want something a little more saturated, these colors are going to drive you crazy. Okay. Oh, there's Paula in the chat. Nice to see you back. I love it. Paula's been doing lots of babysitting. Good keeping you out of trouble, Paula. So let's go to the next step. So the first thing I want to do is get an image on the canvas. And there's lots of different ways to do this. You could sketch it out, but you could again use the Dropbox link. There's one in the description below, or you can use the QR code on the screen, and you can download a version of this outline that I did on my iPad using the Procreate app. So here's the original painting, and then there's the tracing that I did, and you can just download that as a JPEG or PDF and print it out on your computer at home. So let's just see if I can find... folder, which folder we are in. This one. So 00Y Emily Carr, and you'll notice that there's a few different there's 5 folders already in here. That's from the different paintings we've done over the years, but we're going to look in this one. And not only that, we've got a handout that has some instructions on it. I don't do that for every episode, but some of them I do. So there's one for today's episode, although I think I might do things a little bit different than the handout, and I might update the handout. So if you're following along with the handout while I'm recording this right now, it'll do, but I might update it a little bit. Anyway, so you can download these this, print it out on your inkjet printer at home, and then we're going to transfer it onto a canvas. So let's do that right now. Now, I have a whole bunch of canvases that I've ordered online, and I've pre-gessoed them and sanded them, and they're all ready to go. But wouldn't you know it, I can't find them. They're in a box right now. So I'm just using a canvas I got from the dollar store, and you know, it comes pre-gessoed. Gesso is basically like acrylic paint, might have white in it, with plaster powder, and you paint it over top of the surface and let it dry overnight, and then give it a little sanding, and what that's going to do is create a much smoother surface to work on. Now, I can't find those canvases which I've prepped, so I'm just going to use this dollar store canvas, and I'm going to paint directly onto it. So it's not ideal, but it's, again, especially since we're talking about maybe a painting that a beginner can paint, this is going to be probably much closer to the results that you would get with very basic materials. So I'm going to take, oh, you know what? Again, normally what I do too is I tape this down, and then I tape, I tape the printout down, and then I slide some carbon paper underneath, but I also seemingly can't find my carbon paper. So that's all right, because it gives me an opportunity to demonstrate an alternative method of getting an image on the canvas. So we've got this outline. What I'm going to do here is go over the back here with my pencil. And you let me know if this is really loud on the microphone or not. It's possible that it's especially if you're wearing headphones, that this might appear kind of loud, so my apologies. So I'm using, this is an HB pencil, probably just like most pencils that you might have at home. Ideally, I would use something that might be a little bit heavier, like a 4B or even some charcoal, perhaps. Okay, so you can see I didn't go all over edge to edge. Let me see. I'm just going to do a little bit more. The more I do, the more carbon or graphite or charcoal will rub off onto the canvas below here. Whew. I've done something like that in a while now. Okay, so let's So now I get to decide where this is going to be. Obviously, this is an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. and I want to put this onto a 9x12 size canvas. There's a little bit of room at the top and the bottom. I think I might move this down a bit, just give a little bit more space at the top, because there's a lot of space here at the bottom. Okay, I think that's pretty good. And then I'm going to use a pen to go over top of my pencil lines, and we'll see how well this works as a transfer method. All right, so you can see I just draw on there, and what it's doing is it's pressing some of the graphite out onto the other side. Now, you can see here as I'm drawing this, I'm not going to follow my own outline too religiously. I just want to use it to kind of help get the basic composition in place. Like, I'm not doing this in order to create a, you know, a copy that I could sneak into the Vancouver Art Gallery and put up on the wall and run off into the night with the original and then try to sell it on the black market and anything like that. All right, so if it's not exactly the same, I'm not going to be too upset about that. The one thing about using the technique that I'm using is it's definitely creating lines that are much lighter, less visible than they would be if I was using carbon paper or graphite paper. So that might alter the way that I would normally paint this painting, which again, you know, I'm a little bit frustrated with myself about not being fully prepared today, but it does give me an opportunity maybe to show how I would deal with this type of situation if I didn't have all of the bells and whistles that, you know, you might have if you've been painting for a while. Because, you know, if you're just starting to paint, you might just get the most basic stuff and then kind of, you know, let me see if I really want to do this. So, and sometimes I might myself forget. And, you know, make too many assumptions of what people have at home within their availability. And like my nose is starting to run. I've been here working in this studio all day today, setting up and getting ready. Totally fine. Not a problem at all. You know, I've been just pulling stuff out of boxes that are dusty, and you know, and somehow as soon as I press the button to go live, my nose goes, okay, time to start running. So I'm not sure how visible that is on camera. It's probably quite faint, but that's okay. Again, that's to be expected using this particular technique. Unless I had a much darker, like 4B pencil, I'm probably not going to see more lines than that. So I hope that shows up on camera. I spent an hour right before I went live trying to calibrate the white balance on my cameras, and yeah, I'm not totally satisfied with them, so I'd be interested to hear what you think. Does it look a little purpley, perhaps? That's the way it kind of feels to me. Okay, I am going to get a rag here. I don't know where mine are, but I need to find one, so I'm going to grab a rag. I'm just going to mute the audio momentarily. Okay. It's kind of nice not being tied to my lav mic, although, I mean, I don't know. You tell me. How's the audio? Is there any? I have some fans going because it's kind of hot. I'm just hoping this doesn't overheat. So I'm curious if you can hear kind of a rumbling in the background. In fact, I'm just going to mute the music. I'm curious if you could hear any of that fan going. Kathy says, I love how adaptable you are. Great example how simple painting can be done. Just enjoy the process. Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. Okay. So I got my rags. As soon as I started looking for them, I remembered where they were. So that's good. So let's move to our next step is what's called the Imprimatura, and this is one of my favorite steps. It's also probably the thing that is maybe one of the more unique things that I do that I don't see a lot of other people on YouTube teaching people how to do. But if you were to go to art school, and I teach at the best art school in Canada, at least that's what Maclean's magazine says, you would definitely learn this technique. And traditionally, artists do this, which is essentially to prime the canvas with a color other than white, right? So, you know, I get this canvas from the dollar store, and it's got white gesso. So it's been pre-gessoed with this white. And a lot of people just take the paints out and just start painting on it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a number of reasons why artists might apply a different color over top of it to stain it or prime it, as the Italian is called. The prime layer, the first layer. Think of it, you know, it's like if you're painting furniture, you might want to put a primer on it so that the paint sticks well to the surface and doesn't peel off. And it's not quite the same thing with oil or acrylic painting. It's more, especially these days, just purely for cosmetic, aesthetic reasons. And there's some reasons there you can see on camera or on the screen there. So, personally, one of my favorite reasons for doing it is it's a great way for me to warm up. So I've spent all day long, you know, dealing with technical issues, computers and cables and all this kind of stuff. And so my mind is a little bit frazzled. I've been using the left side of my brain all day today. And it's not, you know, the right side of my brain is the more creative side. And I want to access that. And so I kind of just need to shut off that left side of my brain for a while. And so I personally find this is one of my favorite things because it doesn't require any brain power. Put a little bit too much water in there. It doesn't require any brain power. And for a guy that doesn't have a lot of brain to power, you know, I gotta, I particularly like things like this. So, I put a little bit of this warm yellow, and this is the thing. So traditionally artists would use a warm brown, kind of like a brick red, an earthy reddish tone, probably to mimic the look of wood, which they had been painting on for, you know, 1,000+ years. This warm yellow is definitely something that is one of, I guess you could call it a trademark thing that I like to do. It's mostly just because it's really easy to make, right? It's just warm yellow right out of the tube. Again, it doesn't require me to use any brain power to mix a color. I can just take the colors right out of the tube. Of course, you can buy a tube of brown paint if you want, but I'm always trying to think of like, what is the least cost, what takes up the least amount of space. You know, once you start getting multiple tubes of paint and everything, it just becomes a bigger and bigger investment for especially a beginner painter. So I'm just holding it up off the table here so I can get at the edges. I like painting the edges of my canvas. You know, I think it's just one of those things where even if the rest of the painting, like today, is going to be filled up and there's going to be very little, if any, of this yellow that shows up, it's kind of one of those cool things where, you know, somebody else later on is looking at it and it's like, oh, that's weird. Why is there yellow all over the sides? And then you're like, well, that's what's underneath everything. And then somebody's like, oh, really? There's yellow underneath all of those colors? And they start looking at the painting a little bit more closely. And especially if you're a beginner painter, I think you want anything you can possibly hold on to that's going to make your artwork look a little bit more complex than it might otherwise be. Okay. I'm still getting used to the placement. I might have to move this camera up here eventually, but okay. Another thing too, once I'm done painting with a brush, I wipe it off onto a rag. These are just rags I bought at like a not an art supply store, but like a paint supply store. You know, and they're just, I think, old recycled T-shirts or something they just cut up. But it really helps to, like, I can paint for 8 hours with one little old jar of salsa full of water and never need to change the water. I think probably in the 500 episodes I've done, I've only had to change my water maybe 2 or 3 times, because most of the paint gets wiped off on my rag as opposed to into the water. I can feel a sneeze coming on here. 1 second. Okay. So now I'm going to use my blow dryer. I'm just going to speed up the drying time here. So once again, I am going to mute the microphone. Awesome. Kathy says, sounds good to me. I don't hear the fans. That's good. It's a lot brighter than the basement before. Stuff looks less stuff to look at behind, though. Yes. I didn't realize how much stuff I had until I was moving. There's which is one of the good things about moving, is it gave me an opportunity to really ruthlessly part with a lot of unnecessary junk, because I think, which is typical for a lot of artists, is you just see things, you're like, oh, maybe I need this. Oh, I see this in a garbage and maybe I could make something with this. And then you end up having just all this random pieces of wood, and then it just piles up. So, and but I should know that, because I prior to living where we were before, I moved, you know, when I was in college and living in California, maybe every 3 years or so. So, you know, living in the same house for almost a decade, things just start to accumulate. as opposed to, you know, moving every few years. So, okay. Just trying to think of, yeah, okay, I know what I want to do now. Okay. So typically what we do next is to talk about the artist's biography, sometimes for hours. And I have talked about Emily Carr's life and biography, school, and impact on Canadian culture, particularly, and her place in art many times. I think, though, because I'm running a little bit behind, I might just skip that for today's episode, since again I think this is the 6th episode I've done focusing on Emily Carr. Obviously I'm a huge fan of her work, and I also teach at the university named after her. So you could obviously go back and watch those episodes and get your more than fill hearing me talk a little bit about her. So I'm going to move forward here, which for some people is disappointing, and for some others like, oh my goodness, we might be out of here pretty soon after all. So the next step I'm going to do here is to do an underpainting. An underpainting is one of those art words or painting words that has multiple definitions depending on who you ask. So so essentially, underpainting means sort of like the painting under the rest of the painting, that maybe things that we don't necessarily see, or, you know, it's like the understructure. And so some people will consider the Imprimatura part of the underpainting and will sort of combine the underpainting and Imprimatura into one step. Some people will do basically kind of, you know, the drawing, like what we've done here is the image transfer with the Imprimatura and underpainting all in one go. And I think Emily Carr herself, with today's painting, basically, I think that's kind of what she did. I think she, instead of painting or using a pencil, I think she just sketched this directly out with a paintbrush. See, I couldn't find, well, I do have a bunch of brand new tubes of paint, but I couldn't find my paints that I've packed away in my studio. So these are just a bunch of little, almost empty tubes of paint that I've had over the years. It gives me a good, here's me also trying to get rid of some stuff that's been in my studio for a while. Here's get every last dollop of paint out of these tubes. And one of the things I think is often quite shocking is how much paint is actually trapped inside these tubes. There's probably enough in these tubes of paint for me to do another episode or two, and yet, you know, when you're trying to squeeze the paint out, nothing's really coming out. So that's something to just be mindful of, is that because obviously I've got this tool here called the tube wringer, but not everyone has something like that. So what I might end up doing at some point today is cutting some of these tubes open to get at the paint inside. Misha says, I've never heard of this artist before, but I watched videos that were in the description. It was great to learn about Emily Carr. Oh, that's so great. I'm so happy to hear that you did that. I says, the only one that was not working in the YouTube was the Murdoch Mysteries episode. Oh, that's so funny. Okay, so you may or may not, depending on where you're from, know what Murdoch Mysteries is. Murdoch Mysteries is a Canadian TV show, murder. Well, I guess it's a murder mystery generally. I haven't really thought about it. I guess not every episode's about a murder, but it kind of follows this police detective who's in the same era as Jack the Ripper. In fact, I think there was a Jack the Ripper episode. And so one of the episodes, Emily Carr, is she helping solve the Jack the Ripper? Now that I'm trying to... anyway, she appears in one of those episodes. So... Obviously not the real Emily Carr, an actress portraying Emily Carr, I should say. So, let's mix some of these colors together. In fact, maybe before I do so, let's just take a look. So, at this in the painting, you can see I think she's using this kind of bluish purple as to do some underpainting. Now, what I'm thinking about doing actually is not only doing an underpainting, but then covering it with a little bit of another color, some white over top of this, I think. So my underpainting is really going to serve a double purpose of preserving some of these details. Excuse me. In fact, I'm going to mix this onto a smaller plate here. So I just basically want. I'm going to make let's make a black. Let's start out with a black here. So I'm going to take my cool yellow and cool blue and my warm red, and if I mix these together in the right ratio, I'll get a black. And mixing black is like one of the most difficult things we can do, and it can be kind of also tricky to, does that look black? It kind of looks green, it kind of looks purple. But especially for what I'm about to do here, it doesn't bother me at all if it's not quite as black as maybe I want it to be. Let's say, I should also just show you this. So if I really want to check, I can take some white, mix it into my black, and that gives me a clearer idea. So this does look like a little bit of a greenish black. So I'm going to take a bit more of my red and put that in there, and that should help balance out the green. If I was really obsessed with getting a black as close as possible. So let's see here. I really just want to paint, especially some of the outer edges. Bringing the handout nearby so I have that there to refer to. You can see that, especially with what I'm doing right now, I am totally not concerned with accuracy or making, you know, solid brush strokes. It's almost basically like I'm painting with a bit of a, what we call like a dry brush. Because I'm about to cover all of this with some kind of an off-white. So I'm just really using this as a way of being able to, so I can see my lines after they're covered with another layer of paint. Okay, so that's good enough. And I can imagine some people who might be just kind of at the beginning of their art journey are like, what? Well, why would we do that? Well, I'll show you here in a moment. And some people, you know, might want to spend more time trying to do what I just did, but I don't really think that that would be beneficial in any way. Right? In fact, you know, trying to do it kind of quickly like that might be kind of fun, might be a little bit liberating, and give you also a bit of a closer idea to how she would have done something like this. Because I think she probably sketched this out on a white canvas, or slightly off-white. I'm not sure if she primed it at all. Okay. So I'm going to blow dry this. So you also see, as I was blow drying, I just sort of wiped my hand over it, and it smeared and smudged things. But that also is going to speed up the drying time, because instead of these big, you know, lumps, hills of paint, you know, I just basically pop them all, and that paint smears and it dries much faster. Because again, I'm not too concerned about the way this looks. So now I want to mix a color, a background color. What color should I go for? Should I do this right in here? Now what I want to do is I'm going to mix this kind of an off-white color. Let's make kind of a little bit of a cream color. So it's going to be just a little bit of an off brown. That's pretty orangey. I saw there in the chat, you guys talking about Emily Carr's books that she wrote. You know, one of the great ironies is that she became successful very, very late in life. She was very upset about having been kind of mostly ignored throughout the course of her life. And at the very end of her life, she becomes very successful as an author, writing about her, basically taking her journals and transforming them into books. And then she becomes very famous, and it's like, oh yeah, oh, you're also an artist? Oh, this is fascinating. Tell us a little more. And she's just like, man, I spent the last 50 years making paintings, and nobody cared about them until I wrote these books. Okay. So I've just mixed up this color. It's kind of like a brownish, almost even a slightly pinkish quality. I could add a little bit more blue in here to give it a bit more of a brown, but I kind of like this slightly off pink, actually. So now that oh, you also may have noticed I used some of this. This is matte medium. It actually doesn't come in a jar like this. I have a big bucket of it. I just poured it into this little thing to make it easier to dispense. But it's matte medium. Matte medium is basically just acrylic paint without any color in it. It's clear. And I often use matte medium to make paint more transparent. So you can see now I'm painting over everything. And the age-old question I get from people is, why did you spend time painting it yellow only to then 10 minutes later paint it white again? Why not just do it all at once? And you know, it's a great question, and it does make a lot of sense. The main thing is, though, is that even though, you know, and that's one of the reasons I added matte medium here, was not only so to make it more transparent so I could see the lines that I just painted, my underpainting, but also so a little bit of that yellow does come through. And while it might be one of those things where you look at it and you're like, I don't see it at all, it's there, and you are seeing it. You just might not be fully aware that you're seeing it. And, you know, we could try to combine those two steps all into one. But I kind of think of it as like, you know, you could just get pizza, put it into the blender, and serve it as a milkshake. Right? I mean, since you're going to eat it and chew it up, and it'll basically turn into a milkshake in your stomach, why bother having separate layers of pizza sauce and dough and cheese and toppings when you're going to chew it into a sludge anyway? Right? So that you can swallow it and digest it. So, same sort of thing. You know, I could just mix this color all together, but there is a difference between those two colors being on top of one another versus having just mixing that yellow more into here. Another thing is that because this canvas has only one layer of gesso on it, it's a little bit it's the texture's quite rough, and anything I can do to try to fill in the weave of the canvas is going to be, I'm going to appreciate that later when I want to do smaller details. Because painting on a really textured surface, I always compare it to like buttering a waffle. You know, it's like if you've ever buttered a pancake, you know, you put some butter on your knife and you spread it across, and you know, you can use a little bit of butter for one pancake. If you try to use that same amount of butter on a waffle, you get a little bit across and all the butter's gone, and you got to get more, and you end up putting a lot of butter on that waffle, which is why waffles taste so good. But when you use anything, tastes good when there's tons of butter on it. So same sort of thing. If we've got a canvas that's got a lot of texture because of the weave of those fibers, then you're going to need a lot of paint in order for that brush to glide over there nice and smoothly. There's Never Again says, I almost finished your drawing series. Thank you for the videos and your knowledge. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. That's so cool that you're doing the drawing course and you're almost done it too, that's an achievement. That's takes some real dedication. So I'm really excited. Hopefully you've joined the Facebook group and you're uploading your drawings there, because I still celebrate people's drawings and give people feedback on them almost 5 years after I've recorded them. So I'd love to see you there as part of the community. And since you're almost done the course, you should be doing pretty good by this point. Okay, I'm going to blow dry this again here real quick. Another nice thing that happens, you know, once I blow dry it, and it's still not totally dry, but some of that yellow starts to come back through this layer. And so right now I have actually a relatively complex surface here. Again, I'm not sure if that really comes across on camera very well, but you know, I've got this layer that seems like if I was to try to mix this color, it would give me fits, because at one time I see kind of a creamy pink color, and then I see some yellow coming through, so that it would be impossible to really mix this all as one solid color. Anyway, I like how that looks a lot. That's pretty cool. Good foundation for the next step here. Our next step now is to paint the background. I usually like starting in the background and then working my way forward. And that's typically the way most artists work, although when Emily was painting this painting, she was in France and really kind of at the epicenter of a revolution in art, in which artists were sort of questioning everything. So sometimes artists at this particular time might paint the background last. I notice a lot of my students will start with the most important thing, paint that, and then paint the background last. But typically, most of the time, artists will work from back to front. And then I like kind of working kind of back to front, and then maybe go back to the background, work on that again. That's why you see here I've called like background pass number 1, because there could be a background pass number 2 after we've gone through and done the foreground a little bit. So we'll see if we actually need to do that at all. Maybe. So, the original painting here, if we look at this, oh, there's Misha says, I found your channel just a week ago and found it very helpful. I only went over the first 4 lessons, but already in love. I was so happy to find you still do live sessions. Thank you. Oh, that's so cool, Misha. I'm so awesome that we found one another. That's very cool. Okay, so if we're looking at this back... Oh, whoa, what's going on there? We see this kind of blue in the sky. This cool blue coupled with gray. What did she do? So I think she painted... Oh my goodness. One of the, like what I suggest in the outline is basically painting the whole sky, blue, and then painting clouds over top of it. Or we could do... What were you doing here, Emily? I think... I'm going to... I'm going to do a little bit of both here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is... I'm going to take my... Actually, I'm going to do this right here. I'm going to take my white and cool blue, mix this together. You see how little amount of blue I put in there? It might have been maybe 5 parts white to 1 part blue, maybe even less blue than that, just a little bit. And now so I've got my cool blue because I'm painting something in the background, so I want it to be relatively light. So I gotta brace these cameras a little bit better. Okay, so I think what I'm gonna do is maybe add maybe not, well, oops, let's go back up here. I'm going to kind of paint in this light blue all over the place. Maybe not everywhere, but just sort of like loosely paint it in. You know, it's actually requires a surprising degree of restraint to not just go like right up to the lines there, or to leave gaps in there. You know, it's because one sort of wants to fill it all in. I think that's the other thing I want to do is looking at this. I just want to see, are there any gaps in between the trees where we might want to put in. I might even just take this. Kind of paint a little bit in there so that if I want, I can leave a little bit of this blue coming through like part of the sky, perhaps. Okay. Let's come back up here a bit. Now let's mix a black again. Now I did preserve my black from earlier, but you know, I'm gonna mix it again just so that we have, there's my blue and my yellow, so my cool blue, cool yellow, and warm red. Let's mix these together. And I'm just mixing it into that same blue that I had there before. So then notice like how I'm holding the brush kind of a little bit farther away. Now I'm going to go in and just paint with more white. In fact, well, yeah, I'm going to use this white. I was going to clean my brush off a bit. But I think I'm just going to keep it and let it. So because I'm painting pretty quickly, it does allow the paint to blend fairly well because it's still wet, right? If I was going a little bit slower, the paint would just kind of sit on the surface. Or if I was painting with a very thin application of paint, it would be very dry very quickly. Now, I just want to look. You see there's even a little bit of green in here? So I'm going to take a bit of my cool yellow. I don't even really need to add blue to it because there's blue already in this gray. You know, the question might be, why would you put kind of this little bit of green in the clouds? Well, the clouds are going to reflect things in the ground, right? Like the sky will often reflect colors in the ground. So she's being, in fact, I might be even a little bit more doing a bit more than she did. Okay, I'm gonna just wipe that excess paint off. I'm not gonna bother cleaning the brush, but I'm just gonna take a bit more white, maybe with a bit of that gray, so it's not just pure white. And just kind of paint maybe back over top of some of the things I've just been doing here. And lastly, I'm just going to, again, take a little bit of this blue and kind of just maybe repeat. Oh, that's a little bit too much white in there. Now, at the very back of underneath the woods here, she's painted a bit of this blue and some gray and made kind of a darker, cool blue back there. Not sure that's much. That might be a bit too dark. And I see her kind of using some of this elsewhere here. I think she's probably just doing a bit of sketching almost with this a bit. Okay. Never Again says, what's your opinion of Bob Ross? I like Bob Ross. I've done, I did 2 episodes of Bob Ross, maybe 3-4 years ago. Basically, I just did the same episode a second time because I didn't realize how difficult his technique actually is, or was. And it's definitely a technique that lends itself much better to oil paint than acrylics. So I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for Bob Ross. I think Bob Ross was great. I mean, yeah, and he's might not be the celebrated artist by museums and high-flung art galleries, but for most people, he was probably one of the only artists that people can name besides maybe Picasso and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? So anything that gets people excited about making art, I'm all for. Even if I don't really like the work they make, I think more people who are making art, the better the world is, and the safer and happier and less violence there is. So all for it, 100%. Every tree needs a friend, says Never Again. Kathy says happy accidents. Yes. I think that whole idea of the happy accident is a brilliant piece of philosophy, like no joke. Learning to see accidents as gifts is a very profound concept. Okay, must keep tea intake. So I think that's pretty good for our background layer, our kind of real first real brush strokes on here. So let's move to the next step. So I keep looking up there again because that's where my preview screen is temporarily, just as I'm organizing things. So if I'm looking off into space, I'm looking at the text there. So now what I want to do is start working in the foreground, because we've got the background well enough established that I may not need to go back in there at all, but we'll see. We never know. I might want to change some of the colors back there. But for now, let's tackle the foreground. So let's look again at Emily Carr's original painting and just see where we want to begin. Now, I typically would probably want to start in this, usually kind of towards the furthest part, and work my way forward. So I'm calling all of these trees foreground, although technically, you know, some of these trees back here are going to be in the background. So, but just to simplify things, I'm just taking them all as one big bunch here. So I want to think of, like, what is the parts of the so-called foreground, or we can even call it middle ground, that are the furthest away. So that's probably like the shoulders of the roads here, and these trees back in the center. And then as we move forward, we're going to use warmer and warmer colors. So these trees that are, well, trees and buildings, we want to use cool colors. Even though she's kind of using colors all over the place, I still want to try to use some of the teachings that we've been doing here. So, oops, come on back. I usually use my desktop computer, but I haven't got that set up yet, so that's why I'm not familiar with trying to do this all on my laptop here. Well, let's start mixing some paint. So I'm going to take my cool blue and cool yellow, and that's going to give me a green. Now, if I do that right out of the tube, you'll notice like that green is really bright, and almost it's too candy colored. It's a really nice, beautiful, bright, you know, green, but it's electric. We don't really see that color in its full intensity like this. And that's because almost all these colors have a little bit of white in them. They're a bit pastel. So let's try putting a bit of white into this color just to kind of quieten it down a bit. So that's working. Let's put it, in fact, we'll put a bit more white in there, but I'm also going to take a little bit of black, and that's going to make it even more of a neutral color. Not a purely neutral color would be like black, but we're basically neutralizing the color by adding gray to it. And then I guess I'm going to start going to some... Well, I want to see if I can do as much of this painting with this little bit technically larger brush. You know, it's about, well, just a little bit smaller than my pinky fingernail. In fact, that almost seems still a bit too saturated, so I'm gonna knock it back even more with more gray. You know, I gotta go to a smaller brush. And you know, I've put a bit too much paint on here. I'm gonna wipe some of this off. So one thing that is going to be tough to do is to resist the urge, excuse me, to paint over all of my background color. Right? You can see there's lots of little gaps in the paint all over the place. And that's really hard to allow yourself to do. The one just seems to always feel kind of compelled to want to fill it all in. So I'm also taking some of those colors and just putting little dabs of them elsewhere here, which is what Carr herself did. She's kind of using that just to create harmony so that she doesn't just have those colors in one place. Okay. That's probably good for that. I'm going to take a bit more yellow and bring that in here. Again, I'm going to put a bit of white in there. So it's interesting because, you know, the colors on the palette, like when I sort of put a little bit of white and mix them in, I'm like, wow, it looks so dull. And yet when I paint it on here, I'm like, whoa, I don't know, that seems like it might be a bit too much. So it's just always a good reminder that colors can appear very different on the palette than they might in the painting itself when they're next to other colors. So I see that she's actually used this little bit of a lighter cool green in many places here, so I'm gonna follow that again. Now, and again, there's a lot of white. There's probably as much white as there is yellow in this color. So I'm just going to clean some of this up for a bit here. Man, it feels so good to be back painting like this again. It's been weird not having this kind of creative outlet. And it's been so frustrating dealing with internet companies. Who would have thought in 2024 I would have so much difficulty getting internet? I was basically without internet for 3 weeks. And I was able to use my phone, but for whatever reason, even though I'm not too far from where I previously was, barely any data reception at all. I could make phone calls, but even then sometimes they would be, so I'm in this like weird little bubble of data not transmission, but what's the opposite of transmission whatever that is, that's where I'm at right now, which I guess is good. Means I'm probably not next to any, you know, power lines and everything, and so it's good for our daughter to maybe, I don't know, I'll put my tinfoil hat on there. Anyway, let's see, what else do I want to do? Let's do the buildings next. Oh. A data diet. Yeah, says Misha. Totally. Okay, so I've got these little buildings off in the side there. And so they all have a little bit of gray in them. So we see some kind of pinks and greens, browns. Maybe let's start out with... Let's mix... We'll use a bit of a brown. I mean, I see a bit of a warm red. Warm yellow. Let's put a bit more of that. We'll get a orange. I'm just looking at the painting, seeing while I've got this color mixed up. Don't want to use it. Well, let's stay on task, Michael. Let's paint these little houses back there. So there's our brown. I think I want it to be a bit more on the reddish side, that brown. And once again, I'm going to take a little bit of my black and white. And just kind of take some of the intensity of that color down. Okay. Well, you know, it's interesting, actually, now that I'm looking at this painting, you could see how highly textured her surface was. So it actually kind of makes sense that I'm using this canvas that is, you know, fairly relatively rough. All right, there's your kind of happy accident. Adding a little bit of warm yellow into this color. Just to modify it ever so slightly. So I got a few different kinds of colors in here. That's one of the things that Emily does, especially in her more mature paintings, and this is from the very kind of beginning of her career. But in some of her kind of most famous paintings she did in kind of the second half of her life, we see her doing just what I'm doing all the time, kind of playing around with very similar colors, just adding a little bit more of the other in there. I like that a lot. That's cool. So yeah, I'll just show you what I was doing here. I should have showed that before, but just took a little bit more of this yellow, mixing it in there. So I've got a whole sequence of different kinds of oranges and browns and stuff to work from. I should come up here and do this. Okay, let's continue moving across here. Once again, look how where I'm holding this brush, and as I'm painting it or painting with it, the brush is like, I'll just see how can I hold this in the, you know, it's like it's just kind of like I'm not even applying any pressure to it, it's just dragging across the surface here. I notice I'm not really looking at the original painting at the moment. For these kind of little trees back there, it's kind of like a dark brown. So I'm taking my warm red, my warm blue, mix those up, make it a bit more reddish. Ah, there's Dante says, hey, I'm thankful for that beginner videos that you made. Thank you. That's so awesome, Dante. Judy says, hello, I'm new to this channel. Hi, Judy. Great to see a couple new people in the chat there. That's awesome. Be sure to join the Facebook group and upload your work there for the, when we do our sort of maybe every 6 weeks. I do an episode where I go through everything that's on the Facebook group and give free advice on how to improve your work. And even if you're still doing the drawing course, I still talk about those. Give people advice on how to improve their drawings, even though it was years ago we did that. But I want to help anybody become a better artist, and if that's you, then I'm be honored to see what you've been up to. It's also really inspiring for, well, it's inspiring for me, but it's also really inspiring for other people who are at the very beginning of their journey to see work by other beginners who are, you know, just trying to find their way. And what's really cool is there's been people who've been with that group for years. I mean, it grew just out of a conversation here in the chat. And it's so neat seeing what people have made with the knowledge that they have now, and just it's very cool. As a teacher, you know, when you see people developing and growing, it's just the most satisfying thing in the world. Dante says, after I get better sketching, I'll learn how to color next, then animation, since I'm studying programming. Wow, that's cool. I love that how ambitious you are. You've got you got a plan. I love it. Okay. I think. Oh, I was going to paint some of the pinks and things in these buildings here. So, yeah, I'll just use this color. So I'm just going to take some of my warm red and white and black. Gives me a bit of a gray. Just kind of gives me this bit of a dull color. But that color's going to look... Oh, come on, stay in one place. Hey, what's going on? Once again, she's taking a color like that and just sort of dabbing it around just to build up a unified surface. Where else do we see that? So she would have seen this kind of approach to painting when she was an art student in Europe and in France, England, Berlin. This would not have been very common at all back in Canada in the early 1900s. Taking a color like this and just sort of, you know, kind of haphazardly applying it all over the place without really maybe looking for that color in the landscape, that would have been really weird. That would have that would have, you just don't do that in academic classical painting. And that was predominantly what people, you know, if she had gone to art school in Canada, that's what she would have learned, is a very traditional approach to painting. But in Europe, Canada was maybe 40 years behind the times in terms of art and in in the early 1900s. So, which is why one of the great tragedies of Canadian art is that Emily Carr made this painting in France, outside of Paris, in 1911. She comes back to Canada, moves to Vancouver, opens a studio very close to the corner of Broadway in Granville. And those of you who live in the Lower Mainland here know that that's literally where her studio is now, is where they're building a new subway station. And she was really excited to show off all her paintings. Artists from all over the place, even Seattle, like Mark Tobey, drove up to come. Well, I don't know if he didn't drive, and actually I'm not sure if Mark Tobey knew Emily Carr at this point in their careers yet. But Mark Tobey is a famous Seattle artist, abstract painter. Anyway, but artists came from all over the place to see her work and talk to her. And she was super excited, had a big exhibition of her work that she made in Europe, and also inspired by that work. And it was a total flop. I mean, there were artists that came to her opening, but nobody bought anything. And basically, based on that experience, she decided to give up making art for about the next 12, 13 years of her life. So you're thinking, like, she is making paintings like this, which now we consider to be masterpieces, and then, but the reception was so negative that she stopped making art. And so one could, it doesn't really pick up making art again until like 1924, I think. So you could just imagine, what would this incredible artist have done had she not basically stopped making art for this this critical time in her life? And then what kind of, would she have just sort of, with the stuff that she made in the 20s and 30s and she didn't really, I don't know if she made many art. She died in 1945. Not sure how much art she made in those last few years, but let's just say from that 30-year period before she passed away, and 13 of that she wasn't making art. If she was making art for those final 30 years, man, yeah. Anyway, just so that's, and she was very bitter about all that whole experience too, as she should have been. But anyway, I've talked extensively about that. Nikki's, there's a couple questions. Nikki says, "Hey teacher, quick question. I'd like to know how I know what level I'm at. If I'm a beginner, intermediate, or advanced painter, I never know where I fit in. I just never know. You are the best person in the world to tell me that, I believe." Suddenly, this question could be in other people's thoughts, I appreciate any feedback from you. Wow, that's a great question. How do you know what level you're at as an artist? Well, it's hard to say, because pretty much every artist always thinks they're kind of at the beginning. I think the more and more you learn about art, or particularly, let's say, painting, the more I feel, man, I just feel like I'm just cracking the very tip of the iceberg here. So as long as you have any level of humility, right, you tend to always feel like becoming a master is just beyond the limits. So, but it's one of those, I think, determining, especially talking about the scale of difficulty that I mentioned earlier, just think about like how much painting you've done, how many of the things I talk about, like particularly like color temperature, are you still at the point where when I talk about that, you're like, I've never heard that, or I don't really know what that means, or I don't know the difference between warm and cool color. Or are you a little bit, you're kind of like, I think I kind of getting a grasp on that. I feel like I'm not be able to identify a color right off the bat, but when he talks about that, it's starting to make sense to me, or I can see it. Maybe even not being able to do it, but you can see it. If those things are happening, then I think you're beyond just a beginner painter. And I would say we're at that novice level. So if I just go back to my scale of difficulty here. Right, so like again, that beginner is like someone who's never painted before, right? And so just starting to learn. Whereas like a novice, you've done some of the basic exercises. You still feel like you're probably quite lost, but after watching a few of these episodes, you're like, I'm starting to make some sense. Intermediate is where you feel like, okay, I've done these lessons, I've started doing I've done a bunch of these, maybe 5 to 10 paintings, maybe more, maybe 50, maybe 100 of them, and you're starting to feel like, okay, it's starting to make sense to me. I'm starting to feel more confident about doing it. I feel like, if I want to mix a color, I have a pretty good understanding of the color wheel, that I have a reasonable expectation that I can mix that color. Like if I say mix a cool blue, you're like, okay, or cool blue and cool red, you're like, okay, I know where those are in the color wheel, I can mix that. And then you're able to start kind of even maybe painting from life, or you start kind of being able to make those judgment calls on your own. You can paint a little bit more independently. You might start, like I think I say, you start making your own artworks as opposed to doing more of the copies like we're doing. But then but at times you're still like, I thought I was doing it right, but something's going wrong here. I'm not sure what I've done, right? So you're still kind of, you feel like you're getting a grasp, but there's still often lots of surprises. You're like, I don't know, I felt like I was on track, but now I feel like I'm totally lost again. So I feel like that's quite common in that intermediate level. So for instance, most of the students I have at Emily Carr University, where I teach, are probably in that intermediate level, right? They've probably been painting, for some of them, for a decade. Been doing it in high school, and I feel quite confident, but there's still, some clumsiness to some of the paintings, and they feel like, I could probably sleep in or miss this class or that class because I kind of, so there's both a little bit of a level of maybe overconfidence and maybe a certain level of what's the opposite of confidence? Of doubt. But you're growing. When we start getting to these advanced, like that's when you're feeling like, you can look at something and you have a reasonable you feel like I could probably paint that. I could. And then expert is where you're like, you're Emily Carr, or really any of the great masters we've been talking about. You're now like on a magazine cover, or that kind of thing. I don't know if that answers your question. So it's hard to really know. Like I think, if you've done, again, the color wheel, you've painted maybe a half dozen or more of paintings, you're probably somewhere maybe in the novice or intermediate level. And these aren't fully defined things. Like there are, like I've been painting professionally for 20 years, But people always ask me, you should do a watercolor painting class. I would consider myself to be somewhere between a beginner to a novice watercolor painter. Because all the same principles apply to a certain extent, but that there are some curveballs that I still would stump me, right? So I certainly don't feel comfortable teaching people how to use watercolor, if that makes any sense. I hope so. Let me know, Nikki, if that's helpful at all. Dante says, do you know any artists that like messy or scribble type artist style? I found this drawing earlier that was messy but also neat at the same time. It's awesome. Oh, and Judy writes Cy Twombly. That would be an artist that I would mention for sure. Let's look at... I'm not sure if this is the kind of artist you're talking about, but he's probably the most famous artist to kind of do big scribbly kinds of things. I mean, these are the kinds of things that when people see them in museums, they're just like, are you kidding me? Like, this is a professional artist who sells these things for $1 million? Like, okay, I clearly don't know anything about art, which isn't the case. Everyone's allowed to have their own judgments. And many of these paintings are quite big too. Dante says, I didn't see the name, but I will. The artist as reference so I can learn his or her art style. Misha says Jackson Pollock there. Jackson Pollock was famous for doing the drip paintings. That fish comes up. That's pretty funny. So Jackson Pollock. Oops. Let's go back here. See if we have a picture of... I like that. So it gives me a good laugh. Should be a story about a Pollock fish called Jackson. So you can see here's a picture of Jackson Pollock dripping paint from a paint can onto canvas in which he's standing upon. Yeah, messy but organized at the same time. I'm a huge Jackson Pollock fan, and yet we still haven't done a I've had Jackson Pollock on the list, but he keeps getting bumped for other artists. We've done. Who's another messy artist? It wouldn't be too hard. I mean, we could just do a little Google search here. Messy, scribbly artist. So I thought it might be a list of 50 scribble artists. Oh, what's his name? We're gonna do one of his paintings soon. It's gonna drive me crazy. It kind of looks a little bit like that. I don't see anybody's names on here, but like when I teach drawing classes, and it might be in the drawing course. I'm sure we did some stuff with scribbles. I probably showed how to scribble, and how artists like Rembrandt and Gainsborough did lots of scribbling. Because yeah, scribbling is a legitimate method of making artwork. What's going on here? Just gonna refresh this. Let's see. Getting the beach ball of death. I just want to make sure we're still alive here. Okay, I should probably get back to work. Okay, what do I want to do next? Oh, you know, one thing I kind of forgot to do again would be to basically do my underpainting lines. So how should I do this? Let's go. I'm gonna do a. I heard you, teacher. Thanks a lot. 100%. I did see. Where did I saw a comment? Kathy says. Good question, Nikki. Thanks. After 3 years, I think I'm an intermediate artist. I never imagined that ever. So much fun. That's, yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, yeah, intermediate and above for sure, Kathy. So those paint, I mean, which is really exciting, seeing how, like, Kathy, how you've developed. And that's one of the great things about joining the Facebook group and just seeing people's work and doing those feedback sessions over and over. You're just like, I get to see people kind of just come from out of nowhere and just really improve, and that's super satisfying. What I want to do now is I want to go back to kind of what I've started with, which was, if you recall, I mixed a black and used that as for underpainting, and I kind of painted in some of the basic shapes. What I should have done right after I put on this cream color over top of everything was to go back and basically replicate that step. So I want to do that now. I should have done it earlier, but I got distracted with my new studio or whatever it is. Everything's a little bit different. So I want to do that now. So what I'm talking about really are these purple and blue lines throughout the painting. And I think what she did with that color was probably part of her initial sketch. I think she probably used a color like that to draw in most of these shapes. But then she also simultaneously used that color later on to outline things. Like, for instance, these brush strokes kind of in the middle of the canopy, or down the middle of this kind of colonnaded tree-lined road. Those are probably some of the last brush strokes she put in. So she both used it as to sketch the painting out at the very beginning, but then she also used it to come back and solidify everything and outline things. So I think I want to do that right now before I get too much further, because I want some of those lines to be perhaps even underneath some things. So I'm gonna mix up kind of a muted purple. I'm gonna take my cool red and cool blue. This is going to give me a purple, but it's going to be not quite as intense as if I was to mix it with the warm blue, which I'll do a little bit later on. I mean, it looks pretty good. It's just going to be a little, it won't be as saturated as if I use the warm blue. Nikki says, I'm an intermediate artist then, and still learning. Yes, well, that intermediate level can last for decades, right? I mean, one shouldn't expect to go from beginner, intermediate to master in a matter of months or something, right? And so yeah, so yeah, don't be self-conscious thinking like, wow, now I'm in intermediate, how much longer is it going to take to get to this advanced? You know, it can take quite a while. It's kind of a bit pretty, the center there is pretty big. Okay, so let's think about, where do we want these? So we're going to kind of put them back where my initial lines were. This is darker than maybe I was hoping for, planning on. So I'm just going to be kind of careful about where I put it, how much of it I'm going to use. Because the subsequent purple that she uses is not nearly as dark as this. And once again, my brush is just kind of gliding over the surface here. It's not making too many big marks. So essentially it's like I'm painting with what we call like a dry brush. much more of that do I want to use? So I'm going to be a little bit careful about overdoing it. So one thing I'm doing as I'm making this painting is I'm squinting my eyes while I look at the original, and that's going to help me see the contrast between light and dark. All right, so when I do that, I see like, oh, it's much darker, kind of at the base of some of these, or kind of at the where the trees meet the trunks meet, kind of where the densest foliage is. Okay, I think that's probably good enough. I'm glad I took care of that now. Dante says there's so many branches in art to learn. And that's why I think it's good to, I mean, I like to explore and try different things. But there's even within each of those branches, like you said, that there's already tons. So it's kind of nice just to kind of every once in a while just pick a lane and stay in it for a while. And if you get bored, go somewhere else. So, but if you're kind of like too scattered, always trying different things, then you become, what do they call that? When you're just an expert at nothing, something, yeah. When you do a little bit of everything, you become an expert at nothing. Let's move on. Now that I've used almost exclusively mostly cool colors in this painting, I think I want to go to using some warm colors. Just after I do a little bit of this roof. Okay. So warm greens now. Let's take our warm yellow, warm blue, and mix up some of these more grassy greens. So I started with a grassy green that has a lot of yellow in it. So it's not going to be too different than what we've got here. Also using just a little bit of a bigger brush to fill in a bit more space a bit more quickly. Take a bit more blue this time and make it darker green. Now I could paint this a little bit more slowly with smaller brushes, and I will here in a moment. I just want to kind of cover a little bit more ground, a little bit, make up a bit of time here. You can see I'm doing a lot of dry brushing here. Like the brush is mostly dry, right? There's not a lot of paint on it. And that allows me to kind of especially scrub into some areas and just make like very delicate kind of changes. It's almost like you're just sort of cleaning the brush off on the canvas. Okay, so actually, before I clean that brush, I'm just going to mix a bit more of this paint. Just overheated. Darn it. I'm gonna have the fans heating that one up. I do need to get another fan. That's another thing I need to do. What I used to do is I used to put a little bag of ice on top of that camera. I might have to do that. Otherwise that camera's not going to turn on. Okay, so I gotta go get a some ice here. 1 second. ice on top of the camera. Not the best. I don't think that's in the instruction manual. Okay, so because that's happening, let's, I'm going to pick up my pace, I guess, a little bit. So I'm going to take this warm green that I made here. And I'm just going to be now a little bit more intentional about putting some brush strokes around. So previously I was just using that bigger brush and just filling in big brush strokes and things, but it can kind of look a little bit sloppy, so okay. Now, I certainly need to get darker, but I'm trying, what color is it that she's using to darken? I guess, this is the warm green here, warm blue, warm green. Yeah, looks like that's it. I mean, it feels like pretty bold putting these brush strokes in here. But I think that's, let's zoom back out a little bit. So let's zoom in. So I got this quite much darker, kind of like a, let's say, like racing green kind of color. And most of the brush strokes that I see here are actually kind of quite small. They're like almost little dabs. I'm noticing how much that camera's really swinging around up there. So it's one of those things, you know, especially when I was about to go live at 4 o'clock and wasn't getting any audio. I was like, oh my goodness, well, I should just pack it in for the day and we'll try again next week. And I'm like, no, just gotta do it. Let's do it. Even if it's worst things worst, we try going live and it turns into a disaster and I just delete the video. But gotta can't put this off anymore. We finally solved the internet issues. It's like, oops, just do it. And so by doing it, there's all sorts of things that I realized I need that aren't working, or I don't have, or I forgot, which is obviously frustrating, but you know, at some point you can't just sit on your hands forever. You gotta get up and Misha says, I enjoy the process very much. Thank you for making the stream today, regardless of the difficulties. I appreciate that. Thank you, Nikki. Or Misha, sorry. My apologies, Misha. Yeah, well, you know, it's like, I remember years ago I was working as part of a program in Los Angeles called I was working at a place called the Armory Center for the Arts, and they would take artists and they would embed them in schools around Los Angeles. And I remember once I was doing a project where we were going to do collage art, and I drove all the way across town for like a 7 a.m. or not 7 a.m. but I think it was maybe a 8:30 a.m. class. Got there, unpacked everything, did my introductions, went to look in my trunk of materials I brought, and realized, oh, we're gonna do collage, and I forgot the scissors. I don't have any scissors with me today. And I remember the teacher there was like, oh, because I would go into a classroom, there'd be a teacher there who would be very happy I was there to take over for a few hours, and that teacher was like, well, I guess, can you come back next week? And it's like, oh man, if I come back next week, then this whole project is gonna be delayed, and all these kids are ready to go and excited. It's like, it would be really a shame just to pack it all up and just leave right now. And so like, well, you know what, let's we still can make collages. We're just gonna tear paper. I'm gonna show you a bunch of different ways to tear paper. And it ended up being super cool. And I remember the teacher afterwards was like, that was kind of cool. Like, I appreciated how you sort of were able to still do the class, and I learned a little bit about that we can make a collage without actually having scissors. And so so that just always stuck in my mind, is like, we don't always have to, sometimes you can't wait for that ideal moment to begin. Sometimes you have to just start. You just gotta get the ball rolling. Now, I'm debating, do I want to just use this cool blue, or my warm blue, I mean. I'm gonna take a bit of white. Yeah, okay. There we go. That's the color I'm looking for. So this is my warm blue plus white, and I think there's a little bit of yellow in there. It's kind of a bit of a muddy color because warm blue isn't going to be quite like that when we add white to it. But I was trying to figure out, what is this color that I see? Well, so this is an interesting color for her to use in here. Not well. Well, I was gonna say not a lot, but then the more I look, I see. Okay, I see a bit of that. Okay, now what I want to do, I'm going to take some of my cool blue, mix it in here as well. I think that is that cool blue, oops, cool blue and warm yellow. Yeah, that's the right color. Gives me this kind of a muted teal color. And I see a lot of this in this painting. There's a ton of it, so it's where... And now that she might have painted this earlier on in the painting, now that I see this, it looks like a lot of this is under some of my current colors, but that's okay. You know, it's always one of those things where sometimes, you know, when you're trying to kind of reverse engineer a great painting like this, sometimes I look at it for hours and hours, and only after hours of looking at it can I actually see it and see what's really here. I need to go to a bit of a bigger brush to get... So I'm also trying to have a bit of restraint and not just paint in all of that, or sorry, all of these areas where there's white showing through. I want to, you know, preserve as much of that as I can. You can see in like the interior here, that's where things get a little bit more dense, where there's not only just darker colors, but there's less of the white of the paper or paint, canvas, I mean, kind of coming through there. Okay, I don't want to overdo that. Ah. I guess let's go back out Paul says, thanks, Michael. Sorry for the hard time for you. It's a great time for us. Thanks. Well, it's good. First of all, I really like how this painting's turning out, but I'm also just happy. I would have been really bummed out if I wasn't able to paint today. Like, after getting everything set up, and for it to not work would have been a bit of a crushing blow here, so... That color I just put on there, that really makes this painting. That's that cool blue, warm yellow, and a little bit of warm blue plus white. I mean, I don't think I overdid that. That's okay. So much of the rest of this painting is really is fine-tuning here, and it's a lot of like little things, like there's some peachy colors, there's a little bit more, some pinks. I mean, potentially we could be done really at this stage here, but maybe what are those little things that I want to add to? There's like a greenish gray here. So that's the other thing. A lot of this are like grays. So let's just take our black. Make it gray. I want that to be a bit more of a greenish gray, but I think that's going to be fine. Okay, and then we're going to take this kind of orange, let's mix that again. It's a little bit too muted. Oh, actually, you know what? I see that down under here. I'm going to take an orange. I'm going to take a bit of this gray just so it's not quite so intense. Moving right along here. So I'm getting pretty close to being done. There's just a few little details I want to add before we wrap up. Mostly just some greens and then a little bit of purple outlining to finish, and then I think we're going to be done here. So let's look at the original once again, and then let's look at ours side by side. Thinking what don't want to do anything in the sky. Hers is a little bit rougher than mine. Mine feels a little bit more smooth. I could try to, but I think I might just leave it like that. I think it's okay. I'm gonna go back in. I'm gonna take go for a pretty saturated orange now. So most of these tree trunks I haven't really defined all that much. I kind of, you saw earlier when I was painting them, I kind of just did a little very dry brush line work there. Okay, maybe I'm gonna even now just take my warm yellow right out of the tube. That's nice. Just that bit of yellow. That's full concentration is pretty nice. I'm gonna put that right here. Ooh, I kind of like that there. Any more of this yellow? So I'm gonna go back into my warm blue with a little bit of gray. I know she's using this pretty bold in a few places here. So as I'm mixing this, there's less and less of that gray, and I'm getting more and more of just a pure warm blue. She's doing a little bit to outline some of these trees, or the trunks of the trees a little bit. So I want to be careful where and how much of this warm blue right out of the tube I'm putting in, because it's going to come right up front. So if I put any of it in the background, it's going to cause a little bit of spatial confusion. So I want to, because it's really bright, this blue. I mean, it's dark, but it vibrates. That's one of the kind of wonderful things about ultramarine blue, warm blue, is it's dark and yet bright. A little bit of a conundrum there. How much more of that? I don't know if I want to put too much more of that in there. I do want to do a little bit more green though, so I'm taking my warm yellow, warm blue. Okay, my ice pack is dripping from above there. Let's make sure I don't have too much water dripping off of from the sky there. Misha says it's coming pretty nice for me. What's the size of the original painting by Emily Carr? You know, I was trying to find that out. I couldn't find it online. I'm sure it's probably there somewhere. But it is about, maybe you'd say 20 by 32 inches or something. It's about that big, that wide. So, you know, the original, I would say, is maybe at least 4 times bigger than this canvas. Back to my little bit bigger brush. Well, this is almost, I'm kind of staining it almost, just the way that I'm brushing in some of those colors there. See a little bit more of that kind of baby blue. Warm blue and white. Actually, maybe there's a bit of cool blue in there. Yeah, okay. Kind of electric, I kind of like that. Just want to be careful about going too wild with it. I'm not necessarily putting colors where she did here. At this point, when I'm doing finishing touches, it's a little bit of like, you know, something's missing. What can I add? Just looking around, looking for colors. I'm going to take this blue that I just mixed up. I'm And I'm gonna literally dry brush. I'm just gonna wipe off some of that paint and just dry brush a bit of it back into a few places. Hey. Okay, so now again, I'm just squinting, looking at it, looking for areas that need to be darkened. And I see this kind of area right up there that's kind of like a little tunnel of light where it lightens up. So I'm just going to define the, because there's a bit of contrast between the light and the dark there, so darkening that. Warm yellow and some white with a little bit of green on it there. I just like that it kind of pulls things up. I haven't done it quite as an effective job as she did, but so this is just my cool blue, warm yellow, and white with very little blue, except it was left on my, or warm blue, except it was left on my brush. It's even more electric than before. I like this a lot. Man, that camera really shakes around when I move. Yeah, obviously my head is looking at the painting. I really got to stabilize that for next week. Kathy says, looks great, Michael. I have been dabbling with the trees. So many different greens. Misha says, some dark under the trees on the left. Let's see. Yeah, you're right. I suppose I could, another big dark. You know, obviously it's one of these things where we could just do this for hours. And it is kind of fun doing it for hours, but I want to wrap up here in about another 5 minutes here, tops. I don't know, is there anything else? Let's just look down the middle, the center there. After all, the road is leading right down into the middle. So do that, I see some like pink that needs to be in a few places. It's warm red and warm yellow, or sorry, warm red and white. Just and I haven't really used my cool red yet, so I'm gonna take some cool red. White. Maybe a tiny bit of my black, give it a bit of a gray quality, so let's take some of its saturation down. I don't know what that is back there, if it's a building of some kind. Like, is that a house at the end of the road there? I can't tell. Okay, almost done here. Can I live with all that? Is that... Do I want to take a bit more pink? Okay, I'm going to come back and I think just do a little bit of some warm red in a few places. So it's like warm red right out of the tube. I don't think I've used yet, just pure warm red. I feel like her trees are a little bit wilder than mine. I don't like that. I want my trees to be kind of wild too. So I'm just trying to break up the kind of the cartoony cloud-like volumes here, and I like how she left a more of this kind of just very loose. Just using this kind of dirty, cool red here to get a couple of last few lines in. Misha says, thank you very much for the class, and especially all the references and materials provided in the description. My dog is calling me. It's already late in Maryland. Wow. Okay, yes, it's past bedtime. I'll definitely continue following the past streams, and I already can't wait for the next live stream. Thank you so much. Great to see you in the chat, Misha. Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again soon. So, yeah, just last few things here. I've got this cool red. Okay, I think I'm done for the night. So, we've arrived at that time of the show where we're going to compare these paintings side by side, see how they turned out. Pretty happy with the way it turned out. I mean, it's always never perfect, but that's okay. I'm not really striving for perfection. If you liked what you saw and you want to support the channel with a small donation, price of a cup of coffee, $1 or $2, you can donate via PayPal. And here's the link for that. You can just scan it with your phone. It'll take you right to this page there where you can donate safely and securely. You can also donate via send an e-transfer or send a check in the mail. If you want to contact me directly to send a check or e-transfer, my email's on my website, masterstudy.ca. And you can also donate through the Super Chat while we're live. I encourage you to join the Facebook group, take a photograph, whatever you created today, upload it to the group, and I think it'll be about a week and a half or so from today. We'll do a free feedback episode. Even the drawings, if you're working on the drawings, I would love to see them and help you get better with the drawings. You click on that link, it'll take you to the Facebook group there. So, let's go to the final. That's the original painting by the great master Emily Carr herself. And make sure it's in focus. And there's my version side by side there. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as soon as I start looking at it, all I can do is see differences, right? But differences don't mean deficiencies, they're just different. And as long as my painting works, then I could be pretty happy with it. So let's maybe zoom in a bit here. Or should we start? Let's go top left, I suppose. Obviously, I got a little bit more room here, so it would be a little bit closer to that. Yeah, I mean, you know, she was one of the greats, so I can really see the speed of her brushstrokes, whereas mine feel much more deliberate. They feel they're more distinct, less kind of vigorous, fast. There's more energy in hers versus mine. Mine feels a little bit more stylized, but not necessarily in the best way. You know, again, she was one of the greats, so we've tackled one of my favorite artists, obviously. Let's go to the right side here. You know, like, look at how much just of the canvas she's left exposed there, whereas mine, I've covered most of it up. It was very hard for me to resist the urge to paint in all of these places. Like, look at these little gaps showing through there. Right? It's unbelievable how there's so much empty space in there, so much untouched canvas, and yet it looks kind of maybe darker in places than mine. You know, that's the thing with this type of a style. Like, less is more. And that's really hard to show that type of restraint. So the original would be close to that. The original painting kind of ends right where my hand is here. So I photoshopped more stuff onto the painting, and then I even then still had more area on the side. So I added this little triangle of yellow, which I actually really like. Kind of just brings a bit of color in from the periphery. There is always the danger that something like that is going to pull our attention from the center off to the edge, and then we'll just walk away. Let's see what's... I mean, you can see this little, this is her signature here. That's Emily Carr, you know, and so you can imagine, you know, it's probably about this big in here. I'm not going to paint it, but it just gives you an idea of the difference in scale, right? So when I was painting, like, I think she probably did most of this painting with a paintbrush of that size, you know, about the size of my pinky finger. Versus I had to go to a much smaller brush to get details. In fact, she might have even used a bigger brush than that for this whole painting. Let's go over here. Looking down that pathway. I mean, one thing I should mention too is, you know, generally with perspective, you want as many of these lines kind of pointing down and converging towards the end. One of the things I found kind of strange about this is her painting, she's got these vertical lines right there, which can kind of flatten the space out a little bit. And so I couldn't help but try to add some brush strokes that were kind of countering that, which is obviously kind of ridiculous to, you know, like, what's the point of studying from the master if you're going to try to quote unquote fix what the master did? She was able to somehow get away with it and make it work. I just was afraid that if I did that, it would look really flat in that edge. So that's why, you know, even though I have these kind of vertical lines, I contrasted them with some more diagonals there. Yeah, I think just lastly looking down the middle of the painting. All in all, turned out well. You can see I actually went in here and tried to kind of refine a bit of the area between those trees, where she left it fairly ambiguous, and yet again it works. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like it's tricky just to leave it be and not to kind of try to explain everything and make it all clear. Part of the style is having a light touch, and it's a learning experience for me, for sure. Okay. Well, there we go. Another episode in the books. An episode in the new place. Looks a little bit sterile at the moment, but there was hopefully another 500 new episodes coming down the pipeline from this place. So thank you everyone for painting along with me, for joining me with another one of these episodes. I do want to make up for lost time, and if I can fit a few new episodes in here and there, I will. So that's why hitting that notification bell, so you get those notifications when a new episode is kind of quite spontaneously begun. Until then, we'll see you guys probably next week, but you never know. Okay, take care everyone. We'll see you again very soon. Good night. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining me.